Let me show you how I made this bag, which was a feature on the Great British Sewing Bee, I think last year, 2024, I'm not entirely sure. It's a patchwork, no it is not, it's a quilted bag with scraps inside it made from organza. You can download the pattern from the Great British Sewing Bee website or from the Facebook page. I'll leave a link. You'll have to cut out the pieces, print them out, cut them out, and here we are. This is the bag flap and the bag body. Those are the two pieces that you're doing. It says to do it in organza, and I have this piece of black silk organza that I'm going to be using and some gold scraps. I decided to go with gold because I thought that could look quite nice with this gold metal bag handle that I bought. I can link all of the details in the description below. You're going to need to double the fabric to cut out both pieces. Most likely you'll have to get a little bit more fabric than you need, so you could make a couple. This will come in handy later on when I tell you what I didn't like about this. I've seen other people do this with crystals and rocks and things, so I thought I'd test it out. Quite often I will use pins, but pins can leave holes, so I didn't want any holes in this very fine silk organza. And then you need to cut out the whole piece, or the two pieces, as evenly as you can. I will say right now, I wasn't enthralled with the result. You'll see that towards the end of it. I have some ideas. In fact, I've actually filmed a completely new video making the same pattern again, but with a different filling. And I decided to use a different fabric for one of the layers, which you can see. So I will be linking that video as well below when it's ready. So now I'm just cutting out the little finicky details. Organza can be quite difficult to cut. It's nice and crisp, but it slides around a little bit. So you'll be left with two pieces, which one piece will be on the inside, one piece will be on the outside of either. And then it says you need to prepare your scraps and bag pieces. Now this is quite a finicky thing. I actually ended up doing it a couple of times before I was happy. First I thought I could just cut up all the pieces like you see here. I'd gathered up some nice little scraps of gold fabric from where I work, and then I added some of the organza as well. And I thought to myself I could just shove it in. That's what they did on the show. It didn't quite work out that way. Now I'm gonna sew together the bag flap, the two pieces. So you need to leave one end open, which is the long end at the top, and then try and sew as evenly as possible. I was using a 1 centimeter seam allowance at this point. And yeah, so you need to just sew those two pieces together, and you also need to try and sort of map out where your stitching will be so that the two side corners there are as identical as possible. If you end up doing two slightly different angles, you'll have a wonky looking bag. But yeah, so I'm putting that together now. The gold pieces of fabric I had were just remnants from assorted gold silks, gold foiled fabrics, and some gold laces that we had at work. And now I'm doing the same with the bag, but I'm leaving the top bit open there. I made a mistake to begin with, which is just this bit here. I decided to sort of sew in from and leave a tiny gap. I think I actually unpicked that later on and left the entire top bit open. I think you'll see that later on. It became a little bit difficult to insert all the gold scraps, but you make mistakes and you learn from them. So the time has come to fill the bag with scraps in between the layers of organza. I cut my gold scraps into odd angled pieces and different shapes. And then I realized that the scraps are slipping around a little bit, so I put pins into some of the scraps just to hold them in place. Here's the whole bag, and I actually ended up putting pins through nearly every single scrap just to hold them in place whilst I'm sewing these rows of quilting. 2.5 to 3 centimetre spacing between these rows of quilting. Start in the middle because that's easiest to gauge, and then quilt through. You could do any random pattern here. You don't have to do a grid like it says. I mean, with these scraps, I think you could just go wild and quilt in any direction. But this is what the pattern said to do, so I'm doing that. And do that on the lid and on the bag as well. And I'm leaving, as you can see, quite long thread tails on each of these. I'll be going in with a sewing needle to attach the threads and then hide them away, snip them off to make the finishing as tidy as possible. Then next we are going on to the assembly. Now the pattern says right sides together, lay the bag flap piece centered and in line with the basted edge of the body. So on mine, that means the two sides are overlocked, as I think that will look the better and be easier to hide under the zip later on, so like that. Then comes the zip. It needs to be opened and face down with the right side and attached to the other side of the bag. This is possibly the most complicated and confusing part of the pattern, and most likely where you might make a mistake, but again, we learn from our mistakes. And there we go, I added a couple of pins. You can add more if you like, just enough to hold them together. Make sure the distance on either side of the flap is symmetric, as this is what becomes the seam allowance to the side seam later on. And now let's sew it all together. I've sped this part up a little bit because you don't necessarily need to watch me sew a straight line, but I am here telling you that my machine comes with 2 different needle positions, and one in the centre of the sewing foot and one slightly towards the left, and I've changed it over to the left so that from the edge of the foot to where the needle goes into the fabric is approximately 1 centimetre, which is what I want. You can sew over the needles, I quite often do, but the internet goes crazy when people do, so I'm taking them out as I go. And you want to make sure that this seam is as straight and even as possible, and go back and forth a few times at the ends. Now the time has come to put the zip on one side of the bag. I'm changing to a zipper foot. You can get different types of zipper feet to your machine. This is a double-sided one, which is quite handy, multi-purpose. It's difficult to sew over pins with a zipper foot because you want to get the foot as close to the row of teeth as possible. So maybe basting is a good idea here so that you've got it secured in place. I've used 3 pins, some might want to use more and take them out as they go. Make sure the seam is as close as possible to the teeth of the zip, and also the edge of the tape is as close to the fabric as possible. Now when you get to this end where this zip pull is, put the needle into the fabric and lift the foot and close the zip. So pull the slider to the other end of the zip. That kind of removes the bulk of that, and you can continue on a flat piece of tape to sew down the zip with. Quite handy. And then make sure to secure at the end when you get there. And then we're on to the next step. Right, so we've put the flap on and we have half the zip on, and if you fold it up it starts resembling the bag result that we're looking for. Next would be to do the side seams, but before we go on to that I'm going to add a label to the back of my bag. My pink and turquoise garish label on this black and gold bag maybe looks a little bit strange, but it gives me an opportunity to show you how to put on a label. So I pin it in place, centering it along the center line of the quilting, using the lines of the quilting as a guide, and then I'm going to sew it on. So I've changed the top thread on the machine to a white thread. I've kept the black thread in the bobbin. This will make it as invisible as possible from both sides when it's finished. And then this is quite finicky. I hold on to the thread at the back so it doesn't get sucked into the machine when I put the first few stitches in, and then I sew as close as possible to the edge of the label, and then I kind of walk it into the corner and position the needle and put the needle through the label and bag, and then I can lift the foot and I can swivel the bag around like so and continue to sew. So it's kind of like a straight seam all the way around with only one start and stop point. So So you do that for all 4 corners, making sure to catch the label all the way. You can move your pins out of the way if you like. Again, a lot of people get stressed when people sew over pins. I don't have a problem with it. And then get yourself all the way to the end of the label and make sure you have relatively long tails on your thread, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you what I do with those threads. So I snip off a relatively long piece and then I pull the white thread tails to the back. You can actually see a loop sticking out there, so I'm pulling that through so I can stitch them and hide them later on. Now we are coming to the last parts of the assembly of the bag. We're going to attach the zip to the other end, and so you need to fold the flap down to expose the raw, or in my case overlocked, edge, which is where the other half of the zip is going to go. And you want to open the zip up and then attach it. Well, I'm pinning it down. You can pin and baste, you can just use pins, but make sure to spend some time on making this as even as possible. What you want is the 2 side edges of the bag to match up as neatly as you can. This will play in quite a big part when you are doing the side seams. So yeah, spend some time getting that right and then sew the zip down. I'm not going to show you how to do that because we've already just seen how to do that. There are also some loops. Now on the pattern it says to use some ribbon. I happen to have this bit of black cord that I'm going to use, and so I've cut 2 equal length pieces to make loops from. I did actually make these loops a little bit long, something I kind of wanted to change afterwards, but as this was a trial run, I've left it as is. They could be a lot shorter or a lot smaller than this, seeing as I'm using clip-on chain bag handle. So they're in place, and then you can turn the bag inside out and do the side seams. So that's what we're doing here. Now, because of the way it's constructed, the side seams are already finished off because they were folded back earlier on in the process. I guess you could have technically not done that and overlocked the sides as well. That would maybe have made the whole process a little bit easier. I don't know. Something I'll have to try later on. And then sew down the side seams using, I used about 5 to 8 millimeters seam allowance here. I don't remember what the pattern said to do. Sew it all the way down to the little holes at the bottom. Make sure to secure your thread as you go. And there's my head poking in. I tried to edit out as much of my head as possible, but I clearly missed this little bit here. So I'm not going to go back and edit it. And then once you've done both of the 2 side seams and secured your thread, snipped it all off nice and tidy, we are going to do the bottom. So these little holes have been left. They're a raw edge, but those are the ones that make the shape at the bottom of the bag. So this is a bit finicky and tricky and possibly a little bit difficult to see on black fabric, but you want to kind of fold the corners flat and then do a seam along that edge there. I don't know how to best describe it. It kind of makes sense when you're making it. It's only like a 4 or 5 centimeter seam, and I fold the edges, the seam allowance on the side seam out in each direction to just make it less bulky, and then I sew across and then I reverse all the way back so that I've got a double set of stitching, and I secure the thread, and then I do the same on the other corner. And then what I will do, which I actually did not film, was I ran the overlocker over those raw edges just to tidy them up and make it a little bit neater on the inside. Otherwise this bag is pretty neat on the inside. There's not much in the way of raw or overlocked seams going on. So there we are, we've got both corners done, and it's starting to look a bit like a bag. So now I turned it inside out just to have a look and see what it looked like before I went to the overlocker with those raw edges. And yeah, that's given the bag that little sort of square corners that we're looking for. It almost looks a little bit like a toiletry bag at this point, which I guess the pattern could be used for that as well. The flap is kind of flapping around a little bit. I bought some magnetic buttons in the same colour metal as the handle, so gold again. So you can see me playing with the flap there, it doesn't want to stay down. So I got these magnetic gold metal buttons. One side is thinner and one side is a bit thicker, so I'm going to use the thicker side on the flap up there, like so, and then I'm going to use the thinner side on the actual bag body. I'm guessing the weight of this will make the flap kind of snap in place by itself. Hand stitching it in. This is tricky on see-through fabric because you will be able to see the stitching on the outside. Wasn't quite keen on that. Don't know if I'll be bothered to redo it. And then just snap the bag handles in and you are actually done. That is the whole process of the Great British Sewing Bee quilted bag, or quilted scrap bag as I've been calling it because it's got scraps in it. You can see now if you had used 2 layers of solid fabric and avoided the scraps, that would have worked perfectly fine as well. So you can customize this. You can make it in pretty much any color and variation that you want. So it's a cute little bag. What do you think? Would you make it?